Okay, so if you've ever thought your footage looked perfect in camera, until you get to the edit suite and you realize it's completely wrong, there's an issue, congratulations, your eyes lied to you, and that happens to all of us. Today, I want to take you through how to see like a colorist using DaVinci Resolve scopes. You can think of them as your best friend for exposure, for white balance, and essentially for your sanity. So by the end of this, you should feel confident using the waveform, using the RGB parade, the vectorscope, the histogram to balance your exposure, fix your white balance, check your saturation, and even match shots, which is something we'll also take a look at in a video coming later in this series. So first things first, you're going to hear me say this a lot. I'm going to use the word trace. A trace is that little squiggly line or blob that you see on your scopes. It's the visual representation of the pixels in your image. And here's the big deal. Your eyes can lie to you, but scopes don't. Scopes are objective. They don't care about your monitor settings or the lighting in your room. They're showing you the raw data. Each scope shows this trace differently, and I'm going to take you through each of those right now. So let's start with the histogram. It runs left to right. Shadows on the left, midtones in the middle, highlights on the right. Peaks show where the majority of your pixels sit. So if everything's crammed to the left, like it is in this histogram right now, the image is perhaps a bit underexposed. If it's slammed or crammed on the right-hand side, it's blown out. A histogram doesn't tell you where in the frame the problem is, just that it exists. You can think of it as a bird's eye view of exposure, and I generally use a histogram in conjunction with one of the other scopes when I'm working with the image. The next one is the waveform. Honestly, this is probably the one I use the most when I'm assessing and looking at exposure. It maps brightness vertically, but it also matches your image left to right. Shadows are at the bottom, midtones in the middle, highlights up top. You want your shadows hovering just above that zero line and your highlights sitting just below the top line. That way you're not crushing your shadows or clipping your highlights. And what that means is essentially losing information in either of those areas. It's also going to depend on the range that you're trying to get in your image, depending on how it's exposed and what you're trying to replicate. But you generally don't want anything above that top line or anything below the bottom line. The next one is the RGB parade. It's the same idea as the waveform, but it splits red, green, and blue. This is going to be your go-to for checking white balance. If something that should be neutral in the shot, like a gray wall or a white piece of paper or maybe some white snow on the ground, if that shows more blue than red, you've got a blue color cast. And then you want to take those three channels and you want to make sure that they're roughly even in the midtones of the image for it to be balanced. So you'll use that to check and correct white balance if you need to. The next one is the vectorscope, and that's all about hue and saturation. You can think of it as a color wheel. So dead center is white or gray, and the further your trace goes, the more saturated that color is. And here's kind of the magic trick. You see that little line around 11 o'clock? And that's the skin tone line, and it's pretty much all natural skin tones across all ethnicities should sit along that line. And if your skin trace kind of veers off, your subject's going to look sickly depending on which way it's going on that color wheel or that vectorscope. Okay, so that's something to pay attention to and something we'll look at in a bit more detail in a later video in the series. So using scopes together, here's the trick. You don't really rely on just one scope. You remember how I talked about I generally use the histogram in conjunction with other scopes? You're going to use them together. Waveform is for exposure, parade is for white balance. You can use the vectorscope for color and saturation, histogram for kind of a big picture distribution, looking at your image, kind of big picture, bird's eye view. And then together, they give you kind of a complete picture. You can think of them as four instruments in an orchestra. You'll need all of them playing together to stay in tune. All right, they all help you with different things, but together they help you with the whole image, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about color correction order. When you're correcting a shot, here's kind of an order that I would recommend. First, you're going to work with and correct white balance using the RGB parade. Then you're going to work on and adjust exposure and contrast on the waveform using the waveform. Then you're going to fix saturation with the vectorscope. And finally, you're going to check the histogram for overall tonal distribution as well. So that's kind of the order that I would follow when it comes to color correction, and that's something we will look at in the next video in this series. So next, I want to talk about shot matching just give you a little bit of a teaser here. Scopes aren't just for single shots. They're also really important and essential for matching shots in a sequence. You're going to grab a still from your hero shot. We'll talk about this a little bit later in one of the videos later in the series. And then you're going to use scopes to line up exposure and balance and color across the other angles, the other shots that you've got in that sequence or that scene. We're going to go deeper into that in a dedicated shot matching tutorial later in the series, as I said. Okay, so a couple of kind of rookie mistakes or common pitfalls to avoid here. Generally I see people crushing shadows below that 0 line. You're going to lose detail. Don't do that. Clipping highlights is another one, essentially pushing things above that top line on the waveform of the RGB parade. Don't do that either. You're going to lose detail. Those details will be gone. And then another one is letting green or magenta kind of live in your midtones. It's something that you want to avoid, and I'm going to take you through how to do that in this video series. And then finally, something you also want to avoid is oversaturation. You don't want to crank your saturation too much because you like that kind of pop look that you're getting. The vector scope is going to tell on you essentially every time. So use these scopes to assess all of these different things and essentially avoid these mistakes, these rookie mistakes. Okay, so what's next? So that's kind of scopes in a nutshell. I know it feels like a lot of information to take in kind of in one video, but once you start using them, they're going to feel like second nature to you. We're going to use them in the next video in this series. I've put together a one-page cheat sheet that you can download to keep these tips handy. I'll link it in the description below. And in this next video, we'll take this theory into practice with a full color correction workflow inside Resolve. I'll see you there.